The humid Miami night pulsed with the threat of violence. Agent Mike Russo, his lean frame tense, adjusted his position on the rooftop. He gripped the briefcase tighter, his knuckles white under the pressure. Across the rooftop, silhouetted against the city lights, stood Manuel El Perro Guzman, El Chapo's most trusted lieutenant.
"You bring the gringos money, Miguelito?"
Guzman grinned, a cruel, predatory expression. Mike forced a smile, knowing his cover, painstakingly crafted over years, hung by a thread. One wrong word, one flicker of fear could be fatal.
"The money's here,"
Mike said, placing the briefcase on the ground. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine, a clammy counterpoint to the adrenaline surging through his veins. He prayed the surveillance team was in position, their sniper rifles trained on Guzman's heart. Guzman's eyes glittered with greed.
"Good, very good."
Just as Guzman reached for the briefcase, the night exploded in a cacophony of shouting and gunfire. The trap had been sprung. Mike Russo wasn't born to a life of undercover work. He'd been a bright kid from Boston, a scholarship to Georgetown law in his future. But the brutal murder of his parents, gunned down in a botched robbery, had set him on a different path. Driven by a thirst for justice, he'd joined the FBI, drawn to the high-stakes world of undercover operations. His talent for blending in, for becoming someone else, had been apparent from the start. He'd honed his skills over years, infiltrating Italian crime families, dismantling Russian arms trafficking rings, and bringing down outlaw biker gangs. Each assignment pushed him to his limits, testing his courage and his sanity. Taking down El Chapo's cartel had been Mike's obsession for years. He knew the cartel thrived on its logistics, the smooth flow of cocaine from the jungles of Colombia to the streets of America. His plan was audacious: create a front company, a legitimate-looking import-export business, to worm his way into the cartel's supply chain. It took months of meticulous work. He cultivated contacts, built a network of informants, and established a credible business presence. He even learned passable Spanish, enough to blend in with the cartel's low-level operatives. The risk was immense, but so was the potential reward.
The risk was immense, but so was the potential reward.
Section 4. Brothers in Arms. No undercover agent operates in a vacuum. Mike's lifeline, his confidant and friend, was Big Ron Preet, a veteran DEA agent who'd spent years infiltrating Colombian drug cartels. Ron had taught Mike the nuances of the trade, the subtle tells, the unspoken rules of engagement. Their bond was forged in shared danger, in late-night debriefings, and in the unspoken understanding that came from staring down the abyss together. Ron was more than just a handler. He was the brother Mike had never had, the one constant in a world of shifting identities and deadly lies. Section 5. Faces in the crowd. Over the years, Mike had worn many faces: a corrupt city inspector, a high-roller gambler, a ruthless debt collector. Each role brought him closer to the cartel, each deception a tightrope walk between success and disaster.
I once spent 6 months posing as a dirt inspector, ensuring a shipment of cocaine-laden construction equipment made it through Miami's port. Another time I acted as a getaway driver for a cartel money laundering operation, my heart pounding in my chest as I navigated the city streets with $1 million in drug money stashed in the trunk.
Each mission chipped away at his soul, but he clung to the belief that he was making a difference. Gapo 3S Section 6, operation in the heart of Mexico. The stakes had never been higher. Mike Russo found himself deep in the heart of Mexico, tasked with infiltrating one of the most dangerous cartels in the region. His cover, a seasoned arms dealer with connections that spanned continents. The mission, to dismantle the cartel's supply chain from within. Gap 2S. The sun beat down mercilessly as Mike arrived at a remote compound, the air thick with tension and the scent of diesel. He could feel the eyes of armed guards tracking his every move as he stepped out of his vehicle, a nondescript sedan that had seen better days. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained an unreadable mask, a skill honed from years of deception. Gap 2S. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Tables were covered in blueprints, maps, and stacks of cash. Men and women moved with purpose, their conversations a mix of Spanish and coded jargon. Mike's contact, a grizzled man known only as El Jefe, greeted him with a wary nod. "You must be the new supplier," El Jefe said, his voice a low growl. "Let's see if you're worth the trouble." Gap 2S. Over the next few days, Mike immersed himself in the cartel's operations. He brokered deals, assessed shipments, and gathered intel. Every interaction was a dance of trust and suspicion, each conversation a potential minefield. He had to be perfect. One slip, and it would all be over. Gap 2S. One night, while reviewing a shipment of weapons, Mike overheard a conversation that chilled him to the bone. The cartel was planning a major offensive against a rival group, an operation that would leave countless innocent lives in the crossfire. The information was crucial, but getting it out would be nearly impossible. Gap 2S. As dawn broke, Mike made his move. Under the guise of checking inventory, he slipped into the communications room and sent a coded message to his handler. The response was immediate. "Extraction in 24 hours. Hold tight." Gap 2S. The next day was a blur of tension and close calls. Every second felt like an eternity as Mike navigated the compound, maintaining his cover while preparing for the extraction. When the moment finally came, he slipped out under the cover of darkness, heart pounding with the weight of what he'd accomplished and what he'd left behind. Gap 2S. Back in the safety of his handler's base, Mike couldn't shake the images of the compound, the faces of the people he'd deceived. The mission was a success, but at what cost? Each operation left a deeper scar, each victory tainted by the shadows of his actions. Gap 3S, Section 6. Operation in the heart of Mexico. It was a triumph, but also a reminder. In the world of undercover operations, there are no true winners, only survivors. Gap to 3S, Section 7, Shadows of the Mind. The mission in Mexico was behind him, but the ghosts of the compound followed Mike Russo wherever he went. The faces of those he'd deceived haunted his dreams, turning his sleep into a battleground of regret and guilt. Gap 2S. Mike sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling. He stared at the liquid, its amber depths reflecting the turmoil within. How many more missions could he endure before he lost himself completely? Gap 2S. The effects of his undercover work had begun to seep into his everyday life. Simple interactions felt like interrogations, and moments of peace were overshadowed by the looming threat of discovery. He had become a stranger in his own skin, a chameleon with no true colors. Gap 2S. Mike's handler, Sarah, had noticed the change. She approached him with concern, her eyes searching his for any sign of the man she once knew. "Mike, you need to talk to someone. This job, it's eating you alive," she said, her voice a mix of worry and frustration. But Mike just shook his head, the weight of his secrets too heavy to share. Gap 2S. One night, unable to bear the silence any longer, Mike ventured out into the city. The neon lights and bustling crowds offered a temporary distraction, but the relief was fleeting. He found himself drawn to a quiet park where he sat on a bench and watched the world go by. The normalcy of it all felt like a distant dream. Gap 2S. As he sat there, a memory surfaced. His brother, Nick, laughing as they played catch in their backyard. It was a simpler time before the shadows had claimed him. The memory brought a pang of sorrow, a reminder of what he'd lost in his quest for justice. Gap 2S. Mike realized he couldn't go on like this. He needed to find a way to reconcile the man he was with the man he had become. The road to redemption would be long and arduous, but it was a journey he had to undertake if he ever hoped to find peace. Gap 2S. The next day, Mike made a decision. He reached out to a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma and PTSD. The first step was the hardest, but it was a step towards healing. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Gap 3S, Section 7, Shadows of the Mind. The path to recovery is fraught with challenges, but it's a journey worth taking. For Mike Russo, the battle within is just as important as any mission in the field. In the end, it's the fight for his own soul that will define his true victory. Gap 3S, Section 8, The Breakthrough. Just as Mike Russo began to confront his inner demons, an unexpected lead thrust him back into the world he was trying to leave behind. Gap 2's late one evening, while sifting through old case files, he discovered a series of coded messages that had been overlooked. The messages, carefully hidden within innocuous emails, hinted at a major transaction involving El Chapo's cartel. Gap 2S. Mike's heart raced as he cross-referenced the codes with known cartel activities. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, revealing a covert operation scheduled to take place in a remote warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Gap 2S. He knew this could be the break they needed to bring down the cartel once and for all. With renewed determination, Mike contacted Sarah. "Sarah, I think I found something big. We need to move fast," he said, urgency lacing his voice. Gap 2S. Sarah didn't hesitate. She mobilized a task force, and within hours they were en route to the warehouse. Gap 2S. The tension was palpable as they approached the location, each member of the team acutely aware of the stakes. Inside the warehouse, they found a labyrinth of crates and containers, each one potentially housing the evidence they sought. Gap 2S. The air was thick with anticipation as they methodically searched the premises. Then, amidst the clutter, Mike's flashlight caught a glint of metal. Gap 2S. He approached cautiously, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, they found detailed logs of transactions, names, dates, and locations, all meticulously recorded. Gap 2S, this was it. The evidence was irrefutable, a damning testament to the cartel's operations. Gap 2S, Mike felt a surge of triumph, tempered by the knowledge of the lives that had been shattered by the cartel's actions. As they secured the evidence, Sarah turned to Mike, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and relief. Gap 2S. "You did it, Mike. This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for," she said. Gap 2S. But Mike knew this was only the beginning. The evidence would lead to arrests, trials, and hopefully justice for those who had suffered. Gap 2S. Yet for him, it was also a step towards reclaiming his sense of purpose and identity. Back at his apartment, Mike allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection time. Gap 2F. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of clarity. The fight against El Chapo's cartel was far from over, but with this breakthrough they had a real chance at victory. Gap 3S, Section 8, The Breakthrough. In the relentless pursuit of justice, every piece of evidence is a step closer to the truth. For Mike Russo, this breakthrough was not just a victory in the field, but a beacon of hope in his own journey towards redemption. Gap 3S, Section 9, The Showdown. With the crucial evidence in hand, the task force began dismantling the cartel's operations one by one. Gap 2S, the breakthrough had given them the upper hand, but Mike Russo knew that the real battle was yet to come. Gap 2S. The intelligence led them to a secluded villa in the hills, believed to be the hideout of Diego Salazar, one of El Chapo's most trusted lieutenants. Gap 2S. Diego was known for his ruthlessness and cunning, a man who would stop at nothing to protect the cartel's interests. Gap 2S. As the team prepared for the raid, Mike felt the weight of the moment. This confrontation could be the turning point in their fight against the cartel. Gap 2S. Under the cover of darkness they moved in, their footsteps silent and deliberate. Gap 2S. The villa was heavily guarded, but the task force was well prepared. They neutralized the guards swiftly and efficiently, making their way inside. Gap to 2S, Mike and Sarah led the charge, their eyes scanning every corner for signs of danger. Gap 2S. They reached a grand hallway where Diego stood waiting, flanked by his loyal henchmen. Gap 2S. The tension was electric as Mike and Diego locked eyes. "It's over, Diego. We have all the evidence we need," Mike said, his voice steady but laced with intensity. Gap Gap 2S, Diego smirked, his hand hovering over a concealed weapon. You think you can take us down? You're just a pawn in a game you can't even begin to understand, he retorted. For Gap 2S, the room seemed to hold its breath as the two men faced off. In a flash, Diego drew his weapon, but Mike was quicker. Gap 2S. A shot rang out, echoing through the villa. Diego's henchman sprang into action, but the task force was ready. Gap 2S. A firefight ensued, the air thick with the sound of gunfire and shouts. Amidst the chaos, Mike focused on Diego, determined to end this once and for all. Gap 2S. They exchanged blows, each one a testament to their resolve. Gap 2S. Finally, Mike gained the upper hand, disarming Diego and pinning him to the ground. This is for everyone you've hurt, Mike said, his voice filled with a mix of anger and resolve. Gap 2S. As the dust settled, the task force secured the remaining cartel members. The villa, once a symbol of the cartel's power, now lay in ruins. Gap 2S. Mike stood over Diego, the weight of the moment sinking in. This victory was hard won, but it was a crucial step towards justice. Gap 2S. Sarah approached, placing a hand on Mike's shoulder. We did it, Mike. This is a major blow to the cartel, she said, her voice filled with pride. Gap 2S. But Mike knew there was still work to be done. The battle against the cartel was far from over, but this confrontation had brought them one step closer to victory. Gap 2S. As they left the villa, Mike felt a sense of closure. The fight was not just about bringing the cartel to justice, but also about finding peace within himself. Gap 3S, Section 9, The Showdown. In the face of danger, true courage is revealed. For Mike Russo, this showdown was not just a battle against the cartel, but a testament to his unwavering resolve and the strength of his spirit. Gap 3S, Section 10, Aftermath and Reflection. The villa raid had been a success, a significant blow to the cartel's operations, but for Mike Russo, the victory came with its own set of challenges and reflections. Gap 2S. As he walked away from the scene, the weight of the past months began to settle in. Gap 2S. The adrenaline that had kept him going was now replaced with a profound sense of exhaustion and contemplation. Gap 2S. The faces of those he had lost, the sacrifices made and the lives forever changed, played through his mind. Gap 2S. Back at headquarters, the mood was a mix of celebration and somber reflection. The task force had achieved a major victory, but the cost had been high. And Gap 2S. Mike found a quiet corner, away from the noise and commotion. He needed a moment to process everything. Gap 2S. Sarah joined him, her presence a comforting reminder of the bond they had forged through the trials. You did good, Mike, we all did, she said, her voice soft but resolute. Gap 2S. Mike nodded, a faint smile on his lips. It's not just about the takedown, it's about what comes next, he replied, his gaze distant. Gap 2S. In the days that followed, Mike's life began to shift. The media hailed him as a hero, the man who had taken down one of the most ruthless cartels, it's Gap 2S. But for Mike, the real victory was more personal. He had faced his demons, both external and internal, and come out stronger. Gap 2S. He spent more time with his family, reconnecting with the parts of his life that had been overshadowed by the mission. Gap 2S. The task force continued their work, dismantling the remnants of the cartel, but Mike's role began to evolve. Gap 2S. He took on a mentorship position, guiding new recruits and sharing the lessons he had learned. Gap 2S. His experience became a beacon for others, a testament to resilience and determination. Gap 2S. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Mike stood on a rooftop looking out at the skyline. Gap 2S. The fight against the cartel had changed him, but it had also given him a renewed sense of purpose. Gap 2S. He knew that the journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next. Gap 2S. With a deep breath, he turned away from the edge, walking towards a future filled with hope and determination. Gap 3S, Section 10, Aftermath and Reflection. In the wake of battle, true strength is found not in victory alone, but in the resilience to rebuild and the courage to face a new dawn.